Where was Jesus taken immediately after his arrest? Okay, and I think I gave you some of these. Where was Jesus taken immediately after his arrest? Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that Jesus was taken directly to the high priest. Whereas, John says that Jesus was taken first to Annas, the father-in-law of the high priest. So which was it? Was he taken to Annas or was he taken to the high priest, Caiaphas? Well, here are, and I gave you this little table in your notes there, some little side-by-side comparison. Right? In Matthew 26, it flat out says, those who laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and elders were assembled. Mark and Luke are so kind of detailed comparison to Matthew, even though they don't specifically name Caiaphas, it's assumed very reasonably that that's what they intend, because the wording is almost identical in several places. So they're telling the same story that Matthew told. But John said that they led him away to Annas first. So which was it? Could be living in the same house. We'll actually get to that in another issue that gets brought up. But specifically on this one, you always have to notice. Here, let me pull this idea. If we go back to Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that Jesus was taken directly to the high priest. Do you see the word directly anywhere in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? No. It's not there. He inserted that. Right? Maybe he thinks that's what it means, but it does not say that. All it says is they arrested him and they took him to Caiaphas. But John, which by the way, who was written after Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and probably knows what it is that they say, he inserts in his that as they led him away to Annas first. So we don't have a contradiction, we have a clarification. John is kind of clarifying the flow of events and what happened. Now, what's really interesting is some people have pointed out that in Mark and Luke, where it says that he was taken to the high priest, well, who's the high priest? Is it Annas or is it Caiaphas? Well, the answer is yes, both. Well, that can't be. You can only have one high priest. It only takes a little bit of study. Nowadays, we have this thing called Google. It only takes about 2 minutes on Google to find out, this information. But according to Roman historian Josephus, not a Christian, he is a Jew who was in the pay of the Romans as a historian. Okay, so not a biased source. But he points out in his History of the Jews that in about 17 or 18 AD, the Romans kicked out Annas. Annas was the high priest. But Rome stepped in and said, no, we don't like you, had him removed, and appointed someone else as high priest. And so fast forward to the time of Jesus, and the person who happens to be the high priest at this time is Caiaphas, who Rome has appointed. But Josephus points out that Annas still held a lot of sway and power, and there was a lot among the Jews who still viewed him as the rightful high priest. And interestingly, we also learn in other sources that he had such clout and power, 4 of his own sons served as high priest at some point, as well as Caiaphas, his son-in-law. This guy had some power. He had the political clout, he had the social standing, that he was able to call the shots and be involved, to stay involved in the politics, such that a lot of people still refer to him as the high priest. Indeed, and I didn't put in your notes, and I don't have a slide. Do I have a slide? No, I don't. Okay. Luke chapter 3, verse 2 is describing a bunch of things that happened, is trying to give some dates and some times, but it mentions the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. Mentions them both together as being high priests. In Acts chapter 4, Peter and John coming before the Sanhedrin, it says, "And it came to pass on the next day that their rulers, elders, and scribes, as well as Annas the high priest, Caiaphas, John, Alexander, and many who were of the family of the high priest were gathered together in Jerusalem." So in the book of Acts, after Jesus, Annas hasn't been high priest for 15, 16, 17 years at this point, 18 years at this point, but it's still referring to him as high priest. He's still recognized in some fashion as being the high priest. So, all right, any thoughts, questions on that? I think it just jumped right out that it doesn't say directly. So actually the events that we get, which by the way, I gave you a parallel that has Matthew and Luke and John to kind of show how they match up and where things happen. The verses are not going to match up because Microsoft changed the verse numbers into like list numbers, and so it adjusted the numbers, so the verse numbers aren't right on that. But that'll kind of show you that what happened was Jesus was arrested, he was taken to Annas' house, and then later he was sent to Caiaphas. Simple. No contradiction going on at all.